With Jesus is sweeter than the day before. Every day with Jesus, I love Him more and more. Jesus saves and keeps me, and He's the one I'm living for. Every day with Jesus is sweeter than the day before.
I'd like to welcome everybody to the radio and TV Bible class here at First Baptist Church in Sulphur Springs. We're going to start a brand new year, and let's start it with a good Christian heart. We hope that our actions and our ways that we live will encourage somebody to want to be just like the Lord. And it's going to be hard because we can't be just like the Lord. But we can do the best we can to live in right. I see we have a few empty seats, and you that are watching on TV or radio, get in that Volkswagen and get down here. We got plenty of chairs. We'd love to have you. Let you know that our broadcast is for, I don't know how far out we broadcast, but I've heard it in Lampasas, Texas, and the judge was teaching that Sunday. And just as he started, boom, it went off. But we got good music.
Who'd you have?
We had T.F. Lumsden was leading our music that Sunday, and I heard him all the way in Lampasas, Texas. Thomas, come on and give us another song this morning. Y'all join me in a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you so much. Thank you so much for us surviving a year. We have a lot to be thankful for. God, let us inspire us to live a better life this year, that we can touch the hearts of our friends and neighbors. Thank you so much for these folks that have come out today and be with us through this next week as the weather changes. We have a lot of folks that'll be inside, they're homebound and not able to move around as much as they would like to. God, you're going to watch over us because we know that you're in complete control. These things we ask in your name. Amen.
Thank you, Gary. Good morning.
Good morning.
Oh, the man is here. It's good to see you. Let's grab a home. You probably won't even need a book from this. 483. Sweetly, Lord, how we heard thee calling, come, follow me. And we see where the footprints falling lead us to thee. Footprints of Jesus that make the pathway glow. We will follow the steps of Jesus where'er they go. Though they lead o'er the full dark mountains, seeking His sheep, or along by Siloam's fountains, helping the weak. Footprints of Jesus that make the pathway glow. We will follow the steps of Jesus where'er they go. Then at last when on high He sees us, our journey done, we will rest where the steps of Jesus lead at the throne. Footprints of Jesus that make the pathway glow. We will follow the steps of Jesus wherever they go. That old song is good anytime you sing it.
Amen.
And we have a man ready to, just walking the door. And we're glad to have you, James Scott. He's our teacher this morning.
Amen.
It's always good to see that that you made it.
That's a good thing. Thank you, Lon.
I was blessed to have not severe traffic coming in, not even by Town East where I usually hit it. And the speed limit around Caddo Mills didn't affect me either, so it was just not a bad thing. Driving in, I passed lots of places that had flagpoles, and I saw the flags at half-mast. And it brought back all my teenage memories of President Carter, because I was a teenager when he was president. Just missed getting to vote for him, as did James Litzler, who both were among those who weren't quite old enough. But, of course, Eddie was, back in junior high. He didn't care about politics back then. But I just remembered a lot of things. I remember his brother Billy and what he did on the scene. The things. All of that. I remember his mother, Lillian, his wife, Rosalind. The main thing I remember is how he was the outsider who came to Washington. That's how he billed himself, and he was definitely that. He was not part of the bureaucracy. He was not part of the political setup, working inside the Beltway. He was coming in to bring in a breath of fresh air and a new broom. And unfortunately, Washington doesn't work that way. So a lot of the things he was unable to do that he had an ideal about, he could not, because he did not know how to work through the establishment, the bureaucracy, the maze of political negotiating and things like that. But boy, did he have some good ideals that it was hard not to love. He was the first president to declare himself, even as a candidate, and he had Democratic Party strategists who were saying, don't say that, don't say that. He did anyway. I am a born-again Christian. I believe Jesus Christ is my Lord and Savior. And every president up to that time, with one possible exception, had declared himself to be a Christian, but in soft tones, and it is known that everyone before him had been that. Everything from the Anglicanism of George Washington to the Quaker background of Richard Nixon. And only President Carter used the words like, I am born again, I am evangelical. And a lot of his ideals reflected that in a positive way. Around the world, he became known as the civil rights president, as the human rights president. I could tell that in the African population among whom I was working. I met quite a few young people in their teens and early 20s whose first names were Kennedy, Kennedy Kipande, Kennedy Chikogo. I met a few named Johnson, Johnson Chege, but babies left and right were being named Carter while I was there, because they saw him as the man who protected the world's civil rights. He was so idealistic that many people have said, I think with some truth, he was just too nice to be president. And if James Litzler had been old enough, he would have voted for him, I have no doubt. James, do you remember being one of the few in your senior class who was too young to vote for President Carter or anybody else?
I missed it by a year.
He set this tone of Washington. One neat thing he did was at the height of South African apartheid, he had an American warship call into the Simonstown port. And of course, the captain of any American ship coming there had to be received with the greatest honors. And, it's mentioned in the Rand Daily Mail, big newspaper of South Africa. He sent one with a black captain in there just to make a statement. And the South Africans gave him the honors they would have shown a white captain. I was in South Africa a short time thereafter, and I remarked about that, and they laughed at me and said, here's how the rationalism of prejudice works. They said, oh no, you didn't send us a black captain. You sent us a mixed race captain. You don't have blacks in America. Interesting statement, but that's the way prejudice would rationalize itself. President Carter stayed the course with that, ran into all types of obstacles. He made some mistakes because, as some people have said, he was just too nice to be president. He was the greatest person ever to be president in terms of niceness. That put him up against it in dealing with Russia. And here he signed the SALT II treaty, and Russia betrayed him by invading Afghanistan. starting the whole mess over there. They'd asked him right before that happened, what if you can't trust the Russians? He was horrified. They can trust me. Why can't I trust them? I mean, he was just so nice and spoke from the heart. And I'm not surprised at all what he's done, and Mrs. Carter done since then with Habitat for Humanity and any number of other things. In terms of dealing with Iran, he was badly advised. We had a State Department and an intelligence structure that did not understand that religion matters to people around the world. Doesn't have to be the Christian religion. Islam matters. So many of them were former intellectuals and hippies coming out of the 60s who believed, no, God is dead. It can't be significant to politics. And boy, did Iran catch them off guard. Catch them off guard in a horrible way. President Carter was badly advised through that. I looked at some of the strategies he had for dealing with it. He didn't have time to implement, and they were brilliant, actually. He just had to get them through that mess and morass of obstacles. And I believe that, had he had more than one term, he could have probably negotiated things better. That's nothing against President Reagan. I like President Reagan too. But President Carter tried very hard to do it the honorable way. Remember when we had the call in to the White House? Anybody could call the White House during his talk show and just talk to him. Anything from people who were high, and he would try to talk them down to, and actually was very effective at that. He was a great natural counselor. So I would say that reaching age 100, no president had ever done that. Hoover made it into his 90s. John Adams made it to 90. President Carter is the only U.S. president to make 100. And I can still remember my favorite story about him early on. Brand new cadet at the United States Naval Academy. He's being hazed by the upperclassmen. The hazing, of course, is brutal at places like that. And one day a group of Northern cadets told him, we want you to sing Sherman Marching Through Georgia before you're allowed to eat. And he refused. That, of course, is the great anti-Southern epic of the Civil War. And he refused. Now, he's a man who proved himself to be free of racism, free of prejudices, and very receptive to the black community throughout his life, both as the governor of Georgia and president of the United States. But he would not sing Marching Through Georgia. So they would let him eat breakfast, lunch, or dinner, or breakfast, lunch. The fourth day, in the middle of physical training drills, he passed out. And they realized they'd gone too far. They were in danger of being expelled for that type of... He wouldn't tell who had done it, and he managed to recover. And later he became one of our greatest nuclear submarine commanders. He's the only U.S. president to have a degree in nuclear physics, as he became part of Admiral Hyman Rickover's program. Jay, was Hyman Rickover fairly influential in the U.S. Navy? Just somewhat?
Yes, he was.
He interviewed Carter as a young
He
man.
was the U.S. Navy's version of Jackie Fisher.
U.S. Navy's version of Jackie Fisher.
Yeah.
He interviewed young Carter, and he said, throughout Annapolis, you've got a beautiful GPA, 3.96. Did you always do your best? He started to say yes, and he thought back about moments during the time when he could not honestly say he'd given 100% at that moment, or he was tired or whatever. He said, no, sir, I can't say that 100% of the time I did. And Rickover said these words, why not the best? Why not the best? Became the title of Carter's biography, Why Not the Best? So, again, I'm glad we're saluting President Carter, the man who had the high ideals in the president's office. Well, here we have Moses with high ideals leading the brand new freed children of Israel. And it's any number of things you would expect them to be acting like, most of all that their sense of celebration and of freedom would just carry them, for weeks or months or years, knowing what they had escaped. But unfortunately, that is not how they comported themselves a short time afterwards. We see here that they had survived the Pharaoh's chariots and horses through God's intervention, the incredible miracle at the Red Sea. They had sung songs of praise and salvation from God. Someone, when I was in Eddie, you probably remember this, but when we were teenagers, they had a song about it, as if it was being sung by Miriam, only all the youth of churches would sing it. Forgive me. I will sing unto the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. The horse and rider fell into the sea. And that was a very popular youth group song back in the 70s and 80s. And all paralleling what Miriam and the young women had sung. They came a short walk to a place called Marah, where they could not get water. It wasn't the oasis they were hoping for there in the Sinai. The waters were bitter. The very word Marah means bitter in Hebrew. And it tells how he moved forward with these people. He's going south. As Eddie put it last week, he's not going straight line point A to point B. From northern Egypt to the Promised Land, you would parallel the Mediterranean coast. This would be known later as the Way of the Land of the Philistines. It was very much known by that name. Not North Central Expressway, not Santa Monica Freeway, but Way of the Land of the Philistines. They did not take that because of the danger that was involved there, or the difficulties they might be involved with. Scholars have pointed out that the Philistines were not a power at the time, and therefore they have scratching their heads as to why. But the fact is that for centuries thereafter, it would be known as the Way of the Land of the Philistines, and that was Moses' audience, his generation, the generation following. But they've since discovered the Philistines may not have had their 5 city-states organized yet at Gaza and Gath and Ashkelon and Ashdod, but they nonetheless were there. They were known as the Sea Peoples. They were part of a branch of the Sea Peoples who were invading the Eastern Mediterranean. This was a part of the great cataclysm taking place at that moment. The whole world was in a state of change and flux. You had a explosion on the island, near the island of Crete. The island of Santorini, or Thera, had gone up as a single volcano. People have speculated, was that the real-life Atlantis? Hard to say. Some of you may have been to Santorini or Thera if you're on a cruise ship in the Aegean. They usually try to call in there at some point. But it had exploded several times the size of Krakatoa. And I can't remember how many thousands of hydrogen bombs they say that blast was equal to. You also had other things taking place, a series of invasions. The Mycenaean civilization of Greece that created the Greek myths and legends was being wiped out by a Dorian invasion from the north. People were scattering everywhere. The Hittite Empire was on the verge of crumbling in Asia Minor. The Assyrian Empire, such as it was in central Mesopotamia, was crumbling. This was known as the Late Bronze Age collapse. It was like an introduction of the Dark Ages to the Eastern Mediterranean. And in the midst of that, several small groups were able to surge forward. The Sea Peoples attacking everybody in the Eastern Mediterranean was part of that. And it's true that it was under Ramses III that they were deflected away from Egypt, and some settled in what is now Philistia or Palestine. But they also found that they were a factor even before Moses and his people were leaving Egypt. They were a factor even before Ramses II because there were Sea Peoples fighting as mercenaries in the Hittite army against Egypt, and others that were enlisted as mercenaries with Egypt at that time. So I think it's entirely appropriate for Moses, when he wrote Exodus, to have labeled it the Way of the Land of the Philistines. That's what it was swiftly becoming. But they avoided it, as Eddie pointed out last week. They turned south, headed into the heart of the Sinai, and they paralleled the Red Sea coast for as much as they could. Marah was a disappointment. It turned out not to be the oasis. But shortly thereafter, they came to Elim, which was an oasis, with 12 springs of water and 70 date palms. And however many people were with him, 600,000 men plus women and children, were able to be satisfied by that. Picture 12 sets of Barton Springs in Austin flowing at once. That's a fair amount of water coming out there, and they were able to get that at that time. Archaeologists have gone over that spot and said, yeah. Well, the entire Israelite community departed from Elim and came to the wilderness of Sin. What is that word for something that sounds like what it is? I can't remember. Yeah, thank you. Yes, exactly right. How do you say that? Automonothea? son of Marathia. Actually, the word Sin here is also the name of the moon god. And it is believed that this was an area, and Mount Sinai, not far away, were both sacred to the moon god of the area peoples. From basically the time of Abraham all the way to the time of Muhammad, the moon god was the central deity of the Middle Eastern peoples, especially those in the Arab regions. Just like the sun god was big to the Central American civilizations, the Mesoamerican civilizations like the Toltecs and the Maya and the Aztecs, the moon god was big then. He did not stop being the main deity worshipped by the Arabian peoples until the coming of Islam. But even today, Islam retains a moon association. What do you have on the flags of Islamic countries? The moon is still there. While I was in Africa, I encountered some very intense Muslim students I had in the school. They'd gone through the Muslim version of Josh McDowell's Evidence That Man's a Verdict, and they had all types of things that they claimed were accurate. One of which was that when Neil Armstrong landed on the moon, that he heard the call of the muezzin, which is God's call across the surface of the moon, showing it was God's territory. And it was like the call to prayer echoing across there. And they were spreading this rumor around the world in the early 80s. Neil Armstrong finally came out in 1986 and said, no offense intended to the Islamic believers, but no, I did not hear such a thing. But they were taking it absolutely, it had to be. So the moon still had an attachment there, but the sin, the word sin, refers to the moon god. And the wilderness was, of course, a dry land region. And now we see it in verse 2. The entire Israel, not just a few, not just Eddie, who is the troublemaker from the Ten Commandments, as well as the Bible. Naaman. It wasn't just Naaman, it was all of them. Now, who can tell me who played Naaman, the evil one in the Ten Commandments? Even without a machine gun, because we normally saw Edward G. Robinson. He might as well. I think Edward G. Robinson was, in his worst role, was an angel compared to Naaman, because he is truly the villain in so many scenarios here until God finally deals with him in a dramatic way. Well, it's all of them that are complaining. The entire Israelite community grumbled against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. It's been 3 days since they were rescued at the Red Sea, and they've already started complaining and grumbling. I was watching a town hall meeting in Philadelphia at a synagogue. And in this town hall meeting were a panel of 5 different Jewish intellectuals who represented 5 different elements in American politics, from liberal Democrat to conservative Republican. And they were each having discussion with all those present. There were several hundred people present, all of them doctors, college professors, leading business people, engineers, about half male, half female, and they're all listening with intensity. Average age probably near 50, and they're listening to these 5 different people talk. And the most conservative was the Rabbi Daniel Lapin of Washington State, who was raised in South Africa in the Jewish community there. He's the one who has regularly praised people like Billy Graham on his radio show, has regularly praised James Dobson in Focus on the Family, and praised born-again evangelical Christians, but he is a Orthodox Jew. But you hear all this discussion going, and before the end of it, the room is just, people are asking questions, angry questions at every one of these 5 people. Well, the moderator was the commentator Michael Medved, so he took the microphone and said, it's time for us to close, and people are going, no, we've got to answer that, we've got to answer that. He said, you know the stereotype they have of us. If you get 60 Jews in a room for a short period of time, you will soon have 50 totally contradictory opinions out of 60. That, by the way, is repeated in the movie about the birth of Israel, starring Paul Newman, the movie Exodus. He's disguised as a British officer, and he makes that statement, but he's actually a Jewish leader. He actually makes that statement, so it's been around for a while. A lot of contradictory opinions. These are a very restless people. So can you blame the grumbling on the fact that they're Jews? No. I discovered this the first time I attended and was allowed to attend as a voting member of a Baptist business meeting on a Wednesday night. I suddenly realized that there are about 100 people in this room, and there are about 50 different opinions on everything that's brought up. I was fascinated and somewhat discomfited. This was not here, by the way. This was in Dallas, in North Dallas, in a fairly new church. But same way. Well, we can't do that. Yes, we can. No, we can't. We can do this. We can do this. We can't do this. We can't do that. It was fascinating to see the objections that would come to different things. And so, no, this is not a Jewish thing. This is a mankind thing, that people are going to be difficult. They're going to grumble. I'm going to see who made the statement, people are necessarily fickle, changeable, ungrateful, dissimulators. And if you're going to lead a country of them, you better adapt accordingly. This was written 1513 by a man exiled from Florence, Italy. He was talking about how to rule, the first ever political strategy book written. Who was this author? Usually known for his ruthless application. Who said it? Machiavelli. That was Machiavelli. He could not have described the children of Israel any better in this situation. Now, he was talking about the Italian city-states, but he was describing exactly, they're grumbling. It's on loud grumble. The Israelites said to them, if only we had died by the Lord's hand in the land of Egypt, when we sat by pots of meat and ate all the bread we wanted. Instead, you brought us into this wilderness to make this whole assembly die of hunger. Talk about looking at things through rose-colored glasses. We know from archaeology and history that slaves did not have all the bread they wanted, nor did they have all the meat they wanted. In fact, the only meat available to slaves were the shad that could be hauled out of the brackish waters of the Mediterranean. Those were the poor man's fish. All the other fish went to the rich people, went to the Egyptians. How many of you like to live on shad stew all the time? You might as well call it chum. And yet they're claiming, these are the pots they're talking about. Archaeologists have found this incredible type of cauldron. It was as ubiquitous to the Egyptians as the wok was to China. And they cooked everything in these pots. And here they're grumbling because we had plenty of bread, we had all the meat we wanted. They weren't getting beef, they weren't getting mutton. Those were expensive items. They were getting the cheapest fish that could be found. And that's all they had as a stew, if they wanted to look at it that way. They simply were remembering things a little bit different. Their grumbling had caused them to go into a bit of histrionic hyperbole. You brought us into this wilderness to make this whole assembly die of hunger. Later, they'd be griping the same way. We used to have what when we were in Egypt? Leeks and onions by the Nile. Keith Green put that into a song not long before he died. Leeks and onions by the Nile. How many of you would reminisce with leeks and onions as your favorite food? Somehow leeks and onions must have tasted real good from their way of thinking right there. But the Lord said to Moses, I'm going to rain bread from heaven for you. People are going to go out each day and gather enough for that day. This way I will test them to see whether or not they will follow my instructions. On the sixth day, when they prepare what they bring in, it will be twice as much as they gather on the other days. I'm going to give them bread every day. And then on Friday, I'm going to give them twice as much each Friday. So Moses and Aaron said to all the Israelites, this evening you will know that it was the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt. In the morning you will see the Lord's glory because he has heard your complaints about him. And that's true. They weren't just grumbling about Moses and Aaron. Ultimately, as Moses would say, I'm God's messenger. And you have a kill the messenger attitude because you're angry with God. But why are you angry with God? Look what he's done for you. They didn't see it. Some generations are worse than others in terms of their attitudes and some of the negatives about them. It is hard for me not to see my generation as extremely negative because, like some people in this room, I am classified as a boomer. Anybody born between 1945 and 1964 is classified as a baby boomer because that was the surge demographically in our birth rate from all the GIs coming up from World War II and those slightly thereafter. We had a huge boom right then. Then came your Gen X and Gen Y and some say millennials or Gen Z. I firmly believe that there was something wrong with the boomers. Maybe they had it too good after World War II. They grew up in relative affluence. Not everybody in this room did, but boomers as a whole grew up. And when I was on college campuses, I would watch protests in the late 60s, anti-Vietnam protests. And I kid you not, it was like rich kids were the long hairs and the poor kids were the ones in uniform being harassed by them. And 99 times out of 100, that was the case. And to me, my view of boomers has been permanently, of my own generation, has been permanently negativized by what I witnessed as a young person in the late 60s, early 70s. So much that was just wrong because they were just flat out spoiled. I would not expect newly freed slaves to be acting spoiled, but you never know how newly freed slaves are going to react. They got their freedom. I'm sure there was a great day of rejoicing the day they got their freedom, but now it's grumble, grumble. They weren't sure what was going to happen to slaves on Juneteenth or prior to that. But the biggest concern, later slaves would tell you, and I just finished grading a huge paper on freed slaves. I had students went to the National Archives online and each did a different freed slave in their testimony from 1865. And the main thing they had at emancipation was both joy and fear. Fear of the future, fear of the unknown. How are we going to survive? What are we going to do? And that was overwhelming. From the smallest little girl to the biggest, strongest man, what are we going to do? As a result, at least 75% spent 2 more years on the plantations where they were slaves working on shares before they finally realized maybe I can make it out there. Maybe I can get out there. Maybe I can survive it out there. And there were dangers out there. Large numbers were being murdered by redneck gangs on the roads the second they tried to leave. It was frightening. But the hesitation there was the one common factor. Well, with these freed slaves, it's grumbling. Grumbling is the main concern. This evening you will know that it was the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt. In the morning you will see the Lord's glory because he has heard your complaints about him. For who are we that you complain about us? Moses continued. The Lord will give you meat to eat this evening and abundant bread in the morning, for he has heard the complaints that you're raising against him. Who are we? Your complaints are not against us, but against the Lord. Then Moses told Aaron, say to the entire Israelite community, come before the Lord, for he has heard your complaints. As Aaron was speaking to the entire Israelite community, they turned toward the wilderness, and there, in a cloud, the Lord's glory appeared. The Lord said to Moses, I have heard the complaints of the Israelites. Tell them, at twilight you will eat meat, and in the morning you will eat bread until you are full. Then you will know that I am the Lord your God. So at evening, quail came and covered the camp. That's interesting because they still do that. It's in the fall in the Middle East that you have the great European quail migration that targets the Sinai and a little bit of northeastern Egypt. Millions of them flow in, and as they're reaching the coast, they've been flying all the way from Europe. They're exhausted and they're at low level. To this day, Egyptian farmers along Egypt and from Gaza southward, the Palestinians who are hungry have put up nets. What they'll do is get the fishing nets that are worn out and put them up to trap the quail. And some years they trap as many as 3 million. And it's a food source for people who are poor. Those quail are an incredible food source for the Palestinians and for the northern Egyptian peasants. And lately the United Nations is worried about them over-catching. But that has just been a food source ever since. So these were coming in from the Mediterranean, and exactly what was happening. These were simply falling down into the camp, dropping right in your lap. How many of you have ever been on Lake Fork when a 15-pound lunker leaps out of the lake into your lap? I haven't had that happen. Some of you might have. I don't know. Linda might get out there, and that fish goes, oh, she looks too expert. I might as well surrender right now. And off it goes into there. But the quail were just dropping into their laps, left and right. The quail came and covered the camp. They were actually in layers as they gathered them up. In the morning, there was a layer of dew all around the camp. When the layer of dew evaporated, there on the desert surface were fine flakes as fine as frost on the ground. When the Israelites saw it, they asked one another, Manna, manna, what's up? What is it? What's up? What is it? Manna. That's what the word manna means. What is it? Manna? And they call it thereafter because they didn't know what it was. Moses told them, it is the bread the Lord has given you to eat. This is what the Lord has commanded. Gather as much of it as each person needs to eat. You may take 2 quarts per individual, according to the number of people each of you has in his tent. Get enough for 2 quarts for everybody. So the Israelites did this. Some gathered a lot, some a little. When they measured it by quarts, the person who gathered a lot had no surplus, and the person who gathered a little had no shortage. Makes me think of the feeding of the 5,000. Everybody had just enough. Everybody had enough. And they gathered what was left over. Moses said to them, no one's to let any of it remain until morning. Don't save this stuff. Well, people are thinking, I need to save this stuff because maybe I can do without if any provision coming from this undependable source that is God. I don't trust God enough to take care of my tomorrow. I better save some just to be on the safe side, even though they're commanded not to. But they didn't listen to Moses. Some people left part of it until morning, and by morning, it was full of maggots and it stank. Therefore, Moses was angry with them. They gathered it, though, every morning it would appear. And how long did it keep appearing every morning? 40 years. It would appear every morning. Not until Joshua led them across the Jordan and they ate of the food of Canaan did suddenly the manna quit, the moment they began eating of the promised land food. But God's provision was with them daily for 40 years. Keith Green again had a song about that in which he was talking about what they had to do. Manna burgers, manna fries, manna this, manna that. Actually, what they have suggested is that you didn't lose your taste for it. People did not find it distasteful. The nearest man-made food I can think of, now J.R.R. Tolkien in his Lord of the Rings talks about elfin bread, which had all the characteristics of manna, and you could live on a few mouthfuls of it for a full day and it would make you strong and fit. The one food I have found is a Native American food, pemmican, where you let beef jerky get dried out, then you pound that jerky into flour, and you mix it with a bit of fat and stir it up into loaves that will last sometimes for years. They have instances of people eating it when it was 40 years old. It was enough of a trade good, didn't require refrigeration, but it contained massive protein. It contained every nutrient there is, every macronutrient except vitamin C. But if you supplemented it with dewberries or blackberries or blueberries, then you were fine. And it was the perfect food, and you could live on it year-round. It would make you fit and strong, was that pemmican. But it was a lot of trouble to manufacture. But they would actually have wagon loads of it that the Hudson Bay Company and the rival trading companies would trade to each other. Might have been 2 or 3 years old, and it was still good. And what everyone has said was you can eat it every day for a year, and it tastes as good the 365th day as it did the first day. And it's an amazing thing. I've never had any myself, at least not of that quality. Manna was the same, only better. And that's what they were getting every single day. They gathered as much every morning. Each gathered as much as he needed to eat, but when the sun grew hot, it melted. On the 6th day, they gathered twice as much. Why? Can't gather on the Sabbath. And that was the one batch that would keep for another 24 hours. And all the leaders of the community came and reported this to Moses. He told them, this is what the Lord has said. Tomorrow is a day of complete rest, a holy Sabbath in the Lord. Bake what you want to bake and boil what you want to boil, and everything left over set aside to be kept until morning, until the Sabbath. So they're learning about keeping the Sabbath and keeping it holy. And they would set it aside as Moses commanded, and this batch didn't have smells or any maggots in it. Eat it today, Moses said, because today is a Sabbath to the Lord. Today you won't find any in the field, and sure enough, there was no manna out there every 7th day. For 6 days you may gather, but on the 7th day, the Sabbath, there will be none. Notice how bread keeps occurring all through Scripture. John 6, one of my favorite verses by far. I am the bread of life. He who comes to me shall not hunger. Who had bread brought to him by ravens when he was stuck in a cleft of the rock hiding from Jezebel? Elijah. The bread was there. What did the enemy try to tempt Jesus with? Bread. Turn these stones into bread. Jesus' response is, man does not live by bread alone. And that is the main problem the children of Israel had. They do not understand that the biggest problem in their universe is sin, not political, not even their slavery situation. I can tell you right now, I pray to be the opposite of what John Milton said about Lucifer in Paradise Lost. The devil's words were, better to rule in hell than serve in heaven. I look forward to serving in heaven. I look forward to serving in heaven. They didn't quite grasp that. And over 1,000 years later, their descendants would see the main problem as Roman domination. Jesus came to say, no, the main problem is domination by sin. How do you get free of it? I'm the bread of life. I offer you the way to be fed, that you no longer have sin. It's not the Romans. Notice several Romans got saved in the New Testament. It's not the Romans. It is the sin nature that afflicts all mankind, that causes all the world's problems. I offer you freedom from that. Take of the bread of life. Drink of the living water. They took a container of the manna and kept it and would put it with the Ark of the Covenant. Then, verse 17, they're complaining about lack of water. And at Rephidim, there was no water for the people to drink. So the people complained to Moses, give us water to drink. Why are you complaining to me? Why are you testing the Lord? But the people thirsted for water and grumbled against Moses. They said, why did you bring us out of Egypt to kill us with our children and our livestock with thirst? Boy, the griping thing is going off, but I tell you, it's not just the Jews. Machiavelli was more right than I wanted him to be, as he's describing all of human nature, all the nations of mankind, everybody who has this tendency, because it's the sin within them. They see immediate need. They don't see the long-term need. They look at the small picture. They don't see the big picture. God has brought you thus far. Why are you grumbling because you were going without for a little bit? Why would you complain when he's done so much for you? You need so much to be grateful for. Then Moses cried out to the Lord, what shall I do with these people? In a little while they will stone me. They were getting that restless. The Lord said to Moses, go ahead of the people, take some of the elders of Israel with you, enough that they could all gather around and see what was about to happen. Take the stick, the very stick that you stuck into the Nile, and hit the rock at Horeb, and water will come out of it, and the people will drink. Moses did it in the sight of all the elders, who could then pass word, I'm an eyewitness to what happened. And next, an incredible military strategy. Of all the people that lived out there around Israel, the Amalekites, the Edomites, the Midianites, the Moabites, of all of these people, the nastiest were the Amalekites. They were so nasty they could not even ever build a city. They remained the scavengers. They were like the bottom feeders of that region. Yet they could be incredibly dangerous when they all joined together. And Amalek came and attacked them. They attacked first the women and children who were bringing along the bag. That's what scumbuckets they were. And so they had to fight them. Now, can freed slaves fight? Well, if you have time for a few months of training under Spartacus, I'm sure you could fight. But they had not had that for the children of Israel. And Moses, Aaron, and Hur went on top of a hill to watch Joshua and the young men fighting the Amalekites. When Moses held up his hand, Israel prevailed. When he got tired, this is an all-day battle, and he put his hand down, Amalek prevailed. When Moses' hands grew heavy, they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat down on it. Sitting was easier. And then Aaron and Hur supported his hands, one on one side, one on the other, so his hands remained up until the sun went down. So Joshua defeated Amalek and the army with the sword. I will completely blot out the memory of Amalek under heaven, the Lord said. He never said that about the Edomites or the Moabites or any of the others, but just the Amalekites. They were nasty. And if you ever saw the Ten Commandments, you'll remember when Jethro and his daughters had gathered all that water to water their sheep, and this gang of thugs came in to shove